Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our virtual town hall. I'm Sean Hart, Chief of Staff to Congressman Joe Morelle, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Tonight's event is hosted in partnership with Congressman Joe Morelle's office and Democracy Forward. Democracy Forward is a nonpartisan, legal and policy organization that works to defend democracy by holding those in power accountable, especially by challenging unlawful executive actions in the courts. With the Trump administration's relentless onslaught of harmful policies, from chaotic tariffs that disrupt our economy to dangerous voter suppression efforts like the SAVE Act, this conversation comes at a critical moment. Here's how this evening will go. We'll kick things off with brief remarks from each of our speakers, and then we'll move to Q&A, where we'll answer questions you submitted during registration. So let's get started by welcoming our first speaker, Congressman Joe Morelle. He's a senior Democrat in the House and the ranking member of the Committee on House Administration, where he is leading efforts to safeguard our elections and protect the very foundations of our democracy. In this role, he's at the forefront of pushing back against attempts to limit ballot access and undermine trust in our democratic institutions. Congressman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sean. It's a privilege to be with everyone. Thank you for everyone for joining in. Thanks everyone too for your emails, your phone calls, your letters. We are obviously getting huge numbers as people remain incredibly concerned and engaged in what's happening in Washington and with the new administration. And I really want to thank Nikki McKinney, who's joined us from Democracy Forward. Nikki has been on many conversations like this all around the country. And we're so grateful to her and to her organization for their leadership and all the work that they are doing to safeguard and protect people. And it's clear to say that look, we're developing a strategy, but this is a very, very difficult time. It's like we're all going through this national trauma together and watching it as it unfolds. And in Congress, and I know this is frustrating for so many people, and it's been frustrating, I think, for those of us who serve on this side of the aisle to really try to focus on a strategy that makes real sense here in terms of how we push back. And it really takes form in three different ways from my perspective. First is litigate. So we're going to litigate, we're going to legislate, we're going to agitate. And tonight we're going to talk a fair amount about litigation. And Nikki has been right in the middle of it because Democracy Forward has continued to help challenge illegal Trump-era actions in court. We're going to talk about that. I serve on the Litigation and Response Task Force of the House, which was set up by Leader Jeffries. And we're doing a number of things. I think there are over 120 lawsuits, and Nikki can update us if that number is not right. It seems like every day there's another lawsuit because it seems almost certain that every executive order that's signed by the president, who is using executive orders in a way no president has ever attempted to use executive orders. It's almost as though the president doesn't understand what an executive order is supposed to be. And that may be true, actually. But he's clearly expanding executive orders well beyond what has ever been used and seems to treat them as though they're bills passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the president, but they're not. And it is instructive that he hasn't tried to do this through the legislative process. One, I think, just thinks so little of the legislative process itself, but also feels like he can do what he wants to do as though he were a dictator, as though he were a king, and that's so troubling. So the task force that we're using, because members of Congress are not allowed under precedent to sue directly the president or the federal government, the executive branch agencies. But we are working very closely with our partners like Democracy Forward and others who are bringing actions. We are working on an ongoing basis to find pro bono lawyers who will take up cases. So that's the sort of the litigation strategy. The second is, despite the fact we're in a Republican Congress and we don't have a majority either in the Senate or the House, we're continuing to legislate. And that means by bringing amendments to the floor. That's by continuing to debate our colleagues on the floor of the House. I had the privilege of leading the debate today against the so-called SAVE Act, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. We're also raising in hearings where we have people who are testifying in front of Congress, continuing to ask tough questions, both of members of the administration and others who come to support their point of view. And then finally, agitating. And that's really engaging with voters to make sure that they're elevating and amplifying and raising their voices in opposition to all that's going on. And it is hard to keep track of it all. But I was so just heartened by and inspired by the rally this past week at Cobb's Hill Park, as rallies were held all across the country. In Rochester, over 4,000 people came and joined together, continue to elevate their message that the president should take his hands off all the things that we care about in this country. So we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to push back. And we're going to continue to fight against the disinformation and misinformation which characterizes this administration. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and be with all of you, and look forward to answering questions and engaging in this conversation. So thanks so much. And again, thank you to Sean, and thank you to Nikki.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I'd like to take a moment to highlight the work of Democracy Forward. Democracy Forward has been playing a vital role in holding the Trump administration accountable in the courts. Every day, they're working to expose abuses of power, promote government transparency, and ensure that our laws are followed, not bent to serve the powerful few. Democracy Forward has supported over 120 lawsuits challenging Trump-era overreach. They have filed multiple amicus briefs opposing unlawful agency rollbacks, and they are actively working to prevent the dismantling of critical protections, including those related to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and federal worker rights. Representing the team behind this important work is Nikki McKinney, Senior Advisor for Policy and Public Affairs. Nikki, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that really lovely introduction. And thank you, Congressman Morelle, for the opportunity to join you and the people of New York's 25th District. As Sean said, my name is Nikki McKinney, and I work in an organization called Democracy Forward, which, if you've never heard of us, don't worry. We are relatively small and relatively new in the landscape of civil society organizations, just being created in 2016. It has been about 3 months since the Trump inauguration, and Democracy Forward and our partners have really been on the front lines of protecting our democracy, as Sean and the congressman have indicated. We are filing litigation, and we are winning in court on behalf of the people in this country, nonprofit organizations, veterans, houses of worship, federal employees, unions, and more. To date, we and our partners have filed more than 182 lawsuits against 57 executive orders or Trump actions. Of that number, Democracy Forward has filed more than 40 legal actions and launched 76 investigations since January 20th. We are, as Sean indicated, challenging the abrupt discontinuation of funding for essential services, pushing back against Elon Musk and Doge, invasions of privacy, attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and again, the targeting of our nation's nonpartisan career civil servants. And we are winning. If you don't take away anything from what I say this evening, I want to let you know that we are winning. We won the first court order and the only nationwide injunction to prevent implementation of the federal funding freeze, what some of you may have understood as the OMB memo, which would have disrupted the provision of essential services that many on this call, I'm sure, either work for or with or rely on. Things like childcare and elder care, to food services, health programs, community initiatives, and more. In addition, we filed a lawsuit and sought a motion for preliminary injunction, asking the court to immediately lift the administration's unlawful freeze on billions of congressionally appropriated funds under the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Congress passed these laws to support infrastructure improvements and climate initiatives and public health protections, and a single individual should not be able to stop that for political purposes. We were also able to obtain the first mass reinstatement of civil servants. We filed a first of its kind class complaint before what's known as the Office of Special Counsel, We filed that on behalf of federal employees with probationary status who had been terminated and seeking a stay of their terminations. As a part of that process, the Merit Systems Protection Board, or MSPB, ordered that all of our probationary employees, that we represented, be reinstated. And then soon after, the MSPB ruled that more than 5,600 probationary employees from the USDA be reinstated. Now, I know some of you may have seen earlier this week that the Supreme Court ruled that the administration could move forward with the termination of some probationary employees, including those at USDA and 5 other named agencies, those being DOD, Interior, VA, Energy, and Treasury. This is disappointing to say the least, but Democracy Forward, along with the organizations who brought that suit, are going to continue to fight for federal workers. There are several suits protecting federal workers. The one that the Supreme Court ruled on is not our case, and so we have not lost yet. And there are several other cases impacting those employees. Hold one moment for me, guys. Apologies, my daughter is here and she was listening to her iPad with her earphones on and then decided not to do that. So any parents out there who are dealing with that will understand. As the Congressman highlighted and Sean highlighted, we have a case that stopped the defunding of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a small independent agency that many people rely on in order to protect them against big businesses. We secured a court-ordered discovery and fact-finding against DOJ. So this is one of the most exciting court cases we have going. We have 2 federal cases, and the government has been ordered to provide deposition or live witness testimony. That means we are getting to depose DOJ employees and gain access and information into what they are doing. And then even more recently, in another case, a federal court blocked DOJ from unlawfully accessing millions of Americans' Social Security records. I know this has been on the mind of a number of individuals on this call. And in that case, the court ordered for the first time since Trump took office that DOJ had to delete and disgorge. Disgorge is just a fancy legal term saying they had to destroy all of the information that they gained access to. Every piece of data they either had to delete or disgorge. That decision ensures that your personally identifiable information at the Social Security Administration remains protected. But make no mistake about it, even with those wins, the threat to our democracy is real. Each and every day, we are seeing new attacks on our institutions, on laws, and on those who wish to protect and defend them. As you've heard, we have cases to protect the Department of Education, both the executive order to dismantle the Department of Education, but also a lawsuit to protect funding that the department seeks to withhold from schools who have historically accurate social studies programs and the like. And we also have a very important Alien Enemies Act case that we filed alongside our partners at the ACLU. The president's invocation of wartime authority using the Alien Enemies Act is unprecedented. The United States is not at war, nor have we been invaded, and we are gravely concerned with the administration's lack of compliance with court orders and the president's attempt to remove people from this country with no due process. Now, the Supreme Court did grant the administration's request to lift that temporary restraining order, but I will reiterate that in the court's decision, they emphasized that individuals targeted for removal under the act still have the right to challenge their removal. The due process afforded to them under the Alien Enemies Act is still real. The issues that Democracy Forward is taking to court are not red or blue issues. Through our litigation, I want everyone to know we are bringing together groups from across the political spectrum who are concerned about what the Trump-Vance administration is doing. Time and time again, Trump, Elon Musk, and DOJ have shown reckless disregard for the laws in our country. And when they do that, Democracy Forward and our partner organizations will be there to defend you and other other organizations. And before I end my remarks, I want to make sure that I let you know about 2 important resources that we have. For those of you who are federal employees, who know or love a federal employee, we have what we created an initiative called Civil Service Strong. You can access the website at www.civilservicestrong.org. There is that website is full of resources and for federal employees who may be negatively impacted by what is happening right now. And then if you're just an individual who wants to stay abreast of the litigation or know more about what organizations like mine are doing, we created Democracy 2025. You can visit our website at democracy2025.org. There's an executive order resource center there, and other information on their fact sheets and other pieces of information about ongoing litigation, not just ours, but across civil societies, across all civil society organizations. So please stay in touch with us at Democracy Forward. And Congressman, I'll turn things back over to you and Sean. Happy to answer any questions your constituents may have. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Nikki. We're going to quickly transition to the Q&A portion of the program here. Before we do, we would like to point your attention and direct you to a poll survey that should be popping up on your screen any moment now. There it is. You can complete the survey at any time during the town hall. Simply navigate to the polls and quizzes icon at the bottom of your screen. And please know your responses are incredibly valuable and help inform the Congressman's work and priorities moving forward. Okay, so moving on to the Q&A portion. These are your questions that you submitted in advance of this evening. I'll read each question aloud and direct it to the appropriate speaker. The first question is going to go to the Congressman and comes from Amy in Rochester, who asks, please talk about the Dangerous Save Act and how we can prevent this from going forward.
Well, Amy, thanks so much for the question. I spent a good part of the morning leading the debate in the House against the so-called SAVE Act. The Republicans have continued to sort of suggest that this is an effort to stop U.S. citizens from voting in federal elections. The truth is it's already legal in the United States to register to vote if you're not a U.S. citizen in a federal election. And beyond that, it's a felony if you do vote in a federal election and not a U.S. citizen, and that would lead to almost certain immediate deportation. And the truth is there's no evidence it happens. So as with many things in this Congress and with the new Republican Party, it's creating solutions to problems that don't exist. In fact, when Speaker Johnson was asked last year for evidence that non-citizens are voting, he said, well, you know it intuitively, meaning I don't have any evidence. But what it is instead, despite what they say, it is creating a bureaucratic nightmare for people to register to vote. In fact, it's really an end to mail-in registration as we know it, in almost every state in the union has mail-in voter registration. So if you're a registered voter and you move right now, you fill out a form and you mail it in and you continue, they move your registration over and you can continue to vote. That will end under the SAVE Act. There is no more mail-in registration. You have to go to a board of elections and you'll have to bring what they call DPOC, documentary proof of citizenship. And you'll have to bring with you a whole number of things that prove who you are and that you're a citizen of the United States. All this bureaucracy, that could be a birth certificate, but a birth certificate only works if it demonstrates that you were born in the United States and the name is the same that you have now as it is on your birth certificate. But for 70 million women in the United States who have changed their name upon getting married, the birth certificate won't match up with your driver's license. Real ID won't be proof of citizenship unless you're in a handful of states that has citizenship as proof. So most real ID doesn't even have citizenship on it. You could bring a passport, but 150 million Americans don't have passports and they cost $130 to get. So plain and simple, this is voter suppression. They want to stop women. They want to stop people of color. They want to stop students from registering to vote. So put up as many obstacles and then hide behind the guise of we're trying to stop a problem which doesn't exist. So we're going to keep fighting it. Passed by the smallest margins in the House today. And I am reasonably confident that it will not pass the Senate. I've talked to my colleagues in the Senate where it needs 60 votes to be able to be considered on the Senate floor. So I don't think we'll see it happen, but we have to continue to tell people that this is a way to stop people from voting. These are modern day Jim Crow laws that are just designed to try to stop people rather than encouraging people to vote. So, Amy, I hope that's a fair description, and I really appreciate the question.
Thanks, Congressman. This next question is for Nikki. It comes from Trevor in Fairport, who asks, what are the biggest court cases right now pushing back on the things the Trump administration is doing?
Well, there's a little bit of subjectivity, I think, in that question, because it really probably depends on what you think is the most compelling issue facing our country. But I think from an everyday average American, the cases that are probably most compelling to all of us on this call are those that deal with what the work that DOJ is doing. So we have several cases regarding DOJ. Their access to personally identifiable information at SSA, like I discussed. We have one related to access of data at the Department of Labor, as well as Treasury and the IRS. Because I think there are real concerns when there's an individual, and Congressman, I believe I've heard you talk about this on the floor, when there's an individual like Elon Musk, we're not exactly sure what his role is in the administration, what his security clearance is, whether or not he really has a valid security clearance, and the individuals who work for him, who are nameless and faceless at this point in time, and what access to information they have, and then what they are doing with it. Those unknown questions, and I am not here to be a conspiracy theorist, but those unknown questions are ones that as American taxpayers, we deserve the answer to, and heretofore have been denied. So from my perspective, those are the big cases. But I'm also a public school teacher by training. It is what I spent 8 years teaching government and economics in a public high school in Delaware. And I think the idea that this administration doesn't see a place for the Department of Education is a real problem. Our P to 16 school system, I think, is one of the best in the world. And much of that is due to the federal influence that the Department of Education has had and able to ensure that no matter your zip code, you have access to a high quality education. So from my personal perspective, I also see that as being really important. And then third, I would highlight our Alien Enemies Act case. It should worry everybody on this call that without due process, this administration believes they can pluck anyone off of the street and send them to an El Salvadorian prison. Now, they will say it's because they have declared you a gang member. They will say it is because they believe you have broken a law, but they have heretofore done nothing to prove any of that. And once they've even been called to account, baby girl, once they've even been called to account when they knowingly abducted an American citizen, they then throw their hands up and say, there's nothing we can do about it now that they're out of the country. That should terrify everyone from my perspective. So those are the three cases I would highlight, Sean. I hope that helps answer the question.
Thanks, Nikki. This next question is both for you, Nikki, and Congressman Morelle. Nikki, we'll start with you first. It comes from Clementine and Henrietta, who asks, what happens if the administration selectively chooses to ignore court rulings? Are there tools available to hold them accountable?
Well, I certainly will be anxious to hear Nikki's thoughts. I will say it is something that I think keeps us all awake at night because since the beginning and the founding of the Republic, and certainly since 1789, when George Washington took the oath of office for the first time, every American president has, for the most part, abided by court rulings. And the determination by the Supreme Court early in Marbury versus Madison is they're able to review laws for constitutionality. And so the notion, and so far, I think it's not entirely clear. I mean, I think they've tried to abide, or at least tried to say that they have. I'm not sure it's entirely true, and Nikki may have more thoughts about this. But look, this is the social compact we all live under, which is we have three branches of government. The Congress legislates and provides oversight and provides money and funds programs. The executive branch is intended to be able to carry out those laws and enforce them and make sure they're followed. And the courts, at least part of the court's job, is to make sure that when there is a conflict over that, they settle the question. The attacks on the judiciary by Trump are unprecedented. which even led Chief Justice Roberts to offer an opinion and that he put out publicly, basically saying to the president, look, you don't like what we're doing. There's a way to rectify that. That's called appealing. You do not impeach federal judges because you have a difference of opinion. So I think we're anxious about that. All of us as Americans should be anxious, and we're going to continue to fight back. We're going to continue to call them on it, but it is something that I think is unclear and something that is frankly, I think, really concerning to many of us. I'd turn it over to Nikki.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that the congressman has said. And Clementine, I don't know if it'll make you feel better or not, but we have done at Democracy Forward a little more than 40 of these town halls across the country. And this question has come up on every single one. And it is not a question I would have thought I would have ever heard from, on a typical town hall. So we did create a 2-page sort of fact sheet that answers this question on the powers of the court to compel compliance. I'll make sure that the congressman's office has the link to this PDF in case you want to share it with your constituents, sir. But some of the highlights, as an initial matter, courts understanding that this is a concern right now, their first step is if anyone, administration or otherwise, fails to comply with a court order, typically their first step is to issue a more precise, detailed order. And I will say that the Article 3 courts in this country have begun to do that, be much more precise in the orders that they're issuing, because they've noticed that the government has been a little too cute by half after they've issued some orders. The court also has the ability to issue to find a party in civil contempt. They also have criminal sanctions that they can impose. Federal courts can also rely on the U.S. Marshal Service if needed. But also the attorneys that represent the government can also have sanctions brought upon them because they are barred and they have law licenses. So they can also be sanctioned in that respect as well. But I'll tell you, we can't rely on the courts to save us. We are also going to echo the congressman, the court of public opinion is also particularly important in this moment, because it cannot just be congressional Democrats and organizations like mine screaming at the top of their lungs. They need to hear from you all, and the hundreds of thousands of folks who are out in the streets over the weekend is one step. But we also need to lean on some of those red congressional offices in red states, senators, to speak up as well, and to say, even if you have lost in a court case, the sort of fundamental foundation of our democracy relies on the fact that people comply with those court orders. Otherwise, I'm not sure what happens to our constitutional democracy. So, Congressman, I will make sure that Sean has the link to this PDF and trust that you will get it to your constituents. But if you go to democracy2025.org, you will also find this there.
Well, I appreciate that. And the one thing, Nikki, that I didn't mention, because there are concerns about it and there are sanctions, the president in this awful ruling by the Supreme Court last year in Trump versus the United States, now for official acts has immunity. And so if the president says it's an official act, what the court said in that ruling was not only can prosecutors not gather evidence to even bring a case against the president, but Congress may not engage in oversight. But the one thing that is true is while the president might have immunity, members of the president's staff and other members of the federal agencies do not. So, there are some inherent protections, but I wouldn't be candid if I didn't say we're awfully anxious, because frankly, here's a president who has not followed any norms or normative behavior and is really in uncharted territory.
Thank you, Congressman. This is another question directed both to the Congressman and Nikki. I'll invite both of you to respond. It comes from James in Greece, who says, we're seeing a number of early threats to LGBTQ plus rights. What can Congress do to protect those rights, especially the right to marry? What role do the courts play in that fight? Congressman, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's hard to believe in 2025 we're having this debate again. I thought we had settled the matter, and I was very proud when I was a member of the New York State Legislature to make sure that we had marriage equality in New York. Many other states have followed suit. all around the country, some by court order, some by legislative action. We're going to continue to insist on those rights being respected. I support the Equality Act. I'm a member of the Equality Caucus, and we're going to continue to fight to make sure every person in the United States continues to have those rights. And we're going to continue to fight for them, again, by legislating, by litigating, and by agitating. And I join with all my friends in the LGBTQ plus community who have been wonderful partners in this. But I understand people are, again, troubled and concerned. And I share that concern, as I'm sure Nikki does.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was one of the real fears with President Trump's election, the sort of politicization of being woke, and what that was going to mean for communities of color, for the LGBTQ plus community, for individuals with disabilities. And unfortunately, we're seeing that being played out each and every day in a number of different facets, right? Because you are seeing I think we just saw the press secretary just yesterday reports that she doesn't reply to anyone's email if they have their pronouns in their signature block, right? It's little, what I would describe as petty things like that, all the way up to removing the EEOC commissioner, Jocelyn Samuels, unlawfully, because that's an individual who's going to make sure that LGBTQ plus workplace rights are protected. And then everything in between on that spectrum, including summarily firing every individual in the federal government who had anything to do with anything related to DEIA, and the Department of Education indicating that they are going to withhold funds from schools for DEI, anything that violated what Trump considered to be woke. So what I would say is, in a number of spaces, while we don't have an active case related specifically to an individual who may have been discriminated against or unlawfully fired, a number of our cases are squarely within the DEI space, where we are really trying to protect that community. So we filed today on behalf of Jocelyn Samuels, are defending her and her unlawful firing. We have a class suit at the MSPB on behalf of all those DEIA employees. We are, I'm trying to think of other things. We have the Department of Education Dear Colleague letter. That's the prohibition on funding to schools who are doing DEIA work. So it may not be a specific LGBTQ plus case, but our hearts and minds are with the community, and we are going to fight for you in the many, many ways we are seeing the Trump administration attack your rights.
Thanks, Nikki. We've received a lot of questions about what can Democrats in Congress do and what can we do in the courts to protect access to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Congressman Coleridge from Rochester asks, what is being done to save Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security from potential cuts?
Yeah, so this is obviously a grave concern to all of us, and we're going to continue to sound the alarm here. And what's really troubling is these are called mandatory programs under our system. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but when we do appropriation bills, which funds the government, those don't relate to mandatory programs because they're automatic. They just continue to provide resources and benefits. Medicaid seems like it's most in the crosshairs right now, and that's support for people who are senior citizens living in nursing homes. That's for the developmental disabled community. A lot of people rely on Medicaid, and it is one of these things where you can get the sense that Republicans are starting to get really anxious. They just did a resolution today that's going to cut the cost of government, they say. But the Senate seems particularly loath to touch Medicaid. They're starting to get real pushback. That's why, as Nikki said, these kinds of engagements where people are speaking out and speaking up and coming out, they're making Republicans in the Congress very, very, very anxious because they're going to have to answer for this. They can't hide behind Trump forever. They're going to have to take votes on this. So we're continuing to remind people, if you cut Medicaid, you're not only going to impact people who live in nursing homes, you're going to impact everyone who has, whether they have health insurance that's commercial or other payers like Medicare, because when nursing home beds start to close, because you don't have enough staff, because you don't have any Medicaid to pay them anymore, they're going to back up into hospitals. So people who could go to a nursing home won't be able to get a nursing home bed, which means people who are in emergency rooms can't get beds in hospitals because There are people who are waiting transport to a place that no longer has a bed for them. And that means emergency rooms, which are already struggling around the country. And certainly in our community, we're going to get worse and worse. And you can talk and you can, say things like there's a lot of Medicaid fraud. By the way, there's not. We have a special Medicaid fraud unit in New York State that looks at providers to see who's overutilizing. But there is math and physics that will catch up to the Republican rhetoric because this has real world impact. So if we keep speaking out, we keep talking about the impact of this, I believe they will not be able to get this done. And if they even try to, they're going to lose a lot of seats in Congress in the midterm elections. And so I think they're starting to feel the impact and the weight of even their rhetoric.
Thank you, Congressman. We've had a lot of questions in the chat and a lot of questions that were pre-submitted asking, how can people in our own community take action? What are the best actions for us to take? And a lot of questions about, should they be reaching out to your Republican counterparts? What can we do in our own community? I'll pose the question to you first, Congressman, and invite Nikki if you also have thoughts to contribute as well.
Yeah, look, I think people understandably are incredibly frustrated. I hear it every single day, both in official communications and when I'm at Wegmans and I'm at the dry cleaners or wherever I happen to be, and people are asking a question. I think the best thing is by engaging, being here tonight, speaking out, whether it's in social media or whether it's in neighborhood organizations or whatever groups you're a part of, and continuing to talk raises this. And as I said, even the impact of all the different rallies around the country, that's having an impact on members of Congress who are on the other side of the aisle. Because frankly, even their almost inability to pass a resolution today on budget cuts, which I won't go into the details, but this is about the simplest thing they could have done because they could have packaged it 1,000 different ways back home. They still struggled. They tried last night, couldn't pass it today for an extended period. They had to twist arms. They had to bring President Trump in. They haven't even begun to start to do the things that are going to be really hard to do. So speaking out and engaging and showing up and talking, it does have an impact. And by the way, yes, going to Republican members, because, if you're part of a social service agency that takes care of people in our community, it's likely that you take people not just in the 25th Congressional District in Monroe County, but all the surrounding counties and in the region. So speaking up, continue to engage, continue to have your voices heard, continue to engage with family and friends about what's happening. That has real power and real impact. That's the beauty of a democracy.
Thank you, Congressman. Nikki, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I just really echo everything that the congressman said. He laid out a three-prong approach of legislation, litigation, and agitation. And we say legislation, litigation, and mobilization. That third prong is so really key. So whether you call it agitation or mobilization, call an office, write a letter, sign a petition. And I got to tell you, if you see a federal employee, thank them. They're really taking it on the chin right now. And that's just a small thing. If you know one, if you've ever known one, call and say thank you for what you do.
And it's a great point, Nikki, to thank people. The theory of the case, this is the thing that is so frustrating about this. If you sort of think about what they're trying to do, this is kind of broadly what's happening. The president and his friends are trying to literally channel billions and trillions over the decade of money to millionaires and billionaires. So they have to figure out how to do it. How do you get money to your friends who then, by the way, spend hundreds of millions of dollars to support your political candidates? That's what's happening. How do you do it? You do it three ways that they found. One, these tariffs, because they're regressive taxes on American consumers, they're going to generate hundreds of billions of dollars. So that's one way to fund the government. The second is they're going to cut all these important programs like Medicaid, like food SNAP benefits, like all the kinds of supports that people rely on. They're going to take money out of that. And they're going to borrow between $4 and $5 trillion to add to the federal debt. All that money, that's not going in the pockets of working people or middle class. It's going to the wealthiest Americans. That's their theory of the case. And so we have to keep identifying. We can't make it too complicated. Democrats, I'm a proud Democrat. Sometimes we complicate these things. This is simple. This is what's happening. They're taking money from poor, working, middle-class families. They're charging us with debts that our children and grandchildren will pay, and they're doing all in service of millionaires and billionaires who will then take a portion of it to pay them back and fund their political campaigns. That's what's happening. It's happening in real time. We have to speak out and continue to fight against it.
Thanks, Congressman. The headlines this week have been dominated with stories of the tariffs and economic turmoil that they have caused. Grace from Webster asks, is there a mechanism in the courts or in Congress to push back when harmful or unfair tariff policies are enacted? Congressman, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so it was really interesting in the United States Senate just last week. They passed a resolution, which probably won't make it to the House yet, that took away some of the emergency powers that allows the president to impose these, what he calls retaliatory tariffs. Truth is, tariffs in some places have real use and real value. When there are unfair labor practices, when there are unfair climate practices, when we are trying to make sure that in those circumstances where there's unfair labor or unfair trade practice by other countries, that we can impose them. But you don't get up in the morning and say, well, I don't like the leader of this country, or I don't like that country. Or worse, you concoct some formula, apparently using Chat GPT, to come up with an economic policy that imposes massive tariffs on friends like Canada and other places that we have trading partners. And you see what it's done to the markets. I think they were down another 1,000 points. Today, the markets are going to continue to go down. And the lack of predictability, even if you're a business who's trying to build your supply chain in the United States, this is not the way to do it. And I've talked to business leaders now for the last several weeks, all of whom are expressing their real concern about what impact this is. And, in the old days, people might not have paid much attention to the stock market, but 401ks and pensions are all tied up in it. So everybody now pays attention, and you can see what's happening, and it's happening in real time. The president seems completely unwilling to back away from a terrible, terrible economic theory, one which, by the way, Republicans in Congress hate. They just haven't had the courage yet to speak up and say anything about it. But I think that time is coming.
Thanks, Congressman. Nikki, anything you'd like to add?
No, I mean, we can't file litigation until he's done something illegal, and the president has the authority to issue tariffs. But if he does something in contradiction of a congressional statute or another law, then we would certainly act. But economic policy is a tough one. But this is one of those ones where the court of public opinion, I think, is moving the needle more than anything else.
This next question, I'll again give the Congressman and Nikki an opportunity to respond. It comes from Jerry in Parrington, who asks, what's being done to protect our institutions from DOGE? How can we ensure invaluable knowledge and resources are preserved? Congressman, we'll start with you.
Well, it's a great question. Thanks. And honestly, first of all, most of what DOGE is doing isn't even legal. So that's why Nikki and so many other folks are bringing suits against them. There's no transparency. It's astonishing to me that people will say, oh, there's so much transparency. The president's talking to the press all the time. Yeah, he holds press conferences or he talks to the press. He just doesn't say anything. And there's virtually no transparency. We've set up in our community an advisor group for me with 50, 60 different agencies to make sure they're communicating with us about what's happening in real time. But look, Elon Musk isn't an employee of the government. He should not have access to Social Security information. Nikki mentioned earlier, I have top security clearance. When I go in to receive classified information, I can't bring my phone. I can't bring my Apple Watch. I can't write notes to myself to take out. It is very secure. He has no security clearance in fact, even as a government contractor through SpaceX, he still doesn't have security clearance. And yet, who knows what information he's getting access to. So we're pushing back on all of this. And at some point soon, I think it's getting so hot for the Republicans. They recognize now that Elon Musk is a huge liability. You start to see them distancing themselves. And we're hopeful between the courts and public opinion here that we're going to push back and see the end of this. And by the way, I just say this, there are many ways we could find efficiencies in government. There are always ways to do things better, especially when you have a government the size of ours. So we would welcome it, but it's got to be done in a thoughtful manner. No one would ever go into any kind of organization of any size, a not-for-profit, a business, and just start firing people without even knowing what they do. They don't even know the mission of most of these people and most of these agencies, and they're firing people without any recognition. They've fired nuclear scientists. They've fired people who have real responsibility and real expertise, and then sort of sheepishly have to hire people back. So there's many ways to create efficiency in the government. DOGE is not the way to do it.
Yep, and I will just say, we have a number of DOGE-related cases that I've talked about, again, at DOL, SSA, IRS, and Treasury. But there are other organizations, civil society organizations, that also have DOGE-related lawsuits ongoing. If you want to know more about the totality of those lawsuits, there is a litigation tracker on an organization's website, justsecurity.org. And that is every lawsuit that's been filed during this administration. It's a fairly easy spreadsheet to go through it. It also gives you really real-time updates on what's happened in each of those cases. So you can go and look there. But in addition to our litigation work, I also want to highlight that Democracy Forward and other partner organizations like ours are also using FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act process. And I know Congress is using their oversight authority to also gain access and information from DOGE and from the administration about what Elon Musk and his friends are doing in these agencies. And what is ironic, to sort of build on the congressman's point, is that this is an administration who prides themselves on transparency. And I will tell you that they are being anything but as it relates to complying with the Freedom of Information Act and providing information in the timeline that is required under the statute to organizations who have requested it fairly and properly. And so that is another place where we are leaning in. And when they don't respond to our FOIAs, we go to court to compel them to require them to do that. So it's a process and it's lengthy. But that's part of those 76 investigations I talked about in my opening remarks. Many of them are DOGE related in order to gain access to information we've tried to FOIA.
Sean, I think you may be muted.
I am. Congressman, next question is for you, and depending on timing, this may be our last one. Liam from Brighton asks, as the ranking member on your committee, you're the senior most Democrat, able to provide oversight and accountability to the administration. What steps can you take jurisdictionally to hold the administration accountable?
Well, actually, Liam, my responsibilities in House administration are primarily when it comes to oversight broadly around federal elections. Most of the oversight responsibility over the federal executive agencies, et cetera, falls to the oversight committee that my friend Jerry Connolly from Virginia leads. Jamie Raskin is the head of Judiciary, another close friend. We're all working together on providing oversight. But the federal elections piece is really important. In fact, I think it's really important. I don't think I said this earlier, but when you think about it, you really want to erode confidence in a democracy, which is, I think, what Donald Trump and his administration are trying to do. You do three things. You attack a free press, and we've seen them repeatedly attack the press. You attack the federal judiciary's independence. We see that happening literally every day with attacks on judges that give decisions that the president doesn't like. And you attack free elections. That's what the SAVE Act is designed to do, what the president's illegal executive orders intend to do. So I'll continue to work with Congressman Connolly and Jamie Raskin and all my colleagues to continue wherever we can to call them out, to raise objections, to make this public, and to work with outside groups and constituents to make sure that we continue to bring maximum pressure on them to do the right thing or to back off when they do the wrong thing.
Thanks, Congressman. I think we do have time for one more question. Helen from Pittsford, who posed this question in the chat, is asking if you can kind of explain today's budget resolution vote, and I think kind of the differences between the Senate and the House and what's happening here.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. It's hard to follow all this, and usually we fund the government through appropriations. Those are the non-mandatory programs. We've been doing it lately through continuing resolutions, which are an awful way to do this. But then there are reconciliation, which is a bill that hasn't always been used, but can be used every year, that allows you to go into mandatory spending programs potentially and make changes. So in order to do that, you have to have a resolution that'll pass both houses. You give instructions to the houses about what you want to see changes to, and then you vote on whatever they agree to. This is the first time, I think, since the reconciliation was invented in the 1970s, that the instructions given by the two houses were completely different. For instance, it says to the United States Senate, come up with a reconciliation agreement that cuts $4 billion from the federal government. It says to the House, your instructions are to cut $1.5 trillion. So can you imagine giving instructions to two different groups? You cut 4 billion, you cut 1.5 trillion, and somehow they're supposed to agree at the back end. This is the craziest thing because the instructions are wildly different. They ask for different amounts of borrowing authority. The House can borrow up to 4 trillion, the Senate 5 trillion, but again, they have to agree at some point on a number. They struggled last night. They couldn't get the votes, despite Donald Trump being on the phone, despite them twisting arms, despite them threatening people. That vote finally got called this morning. They went through the same exercise. They managed to pass it by the narrowest margin. But none of this is real until they actually get to the bills that they have to vote for, which probably now happen in August, September, maybe even a little later. Then they're going to have to actually make public the cuts to Medicaid that they're proposing, the cuts to other important programs, cuts to programs for farmers, for veterans, for children, for the developmentally disabled, cuts in the size of agencies, Social Security Administration, Veterans Administration. When they do that, when they actually put it in print before the vote, Americans will finally see the specifics of what they're talking about, and they will be outraged because, again, this is cutting the budget for programs that are so important, borrowing trillions of dollars of additional debt, and having tariffs that bring in money because consumers in the most regressive taxes possible be paying. And it's all intended to go to billionaires, which are also in reconciliation, the big tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires. They'll use that money to continue to support Donald Trump's policies through dark money and other contributions. In fact, it's important to note the 6 top givers in last year's election cycle all gave to Republicans. Each one of them gave a minimum of $100 million, the top 6, including Elon Musk, the #1 giver, who gave $391 million to the president and his friends. That's what's happening. And people we're going to have to watch it. We're going to have to communicate. We're going to have to do it in events like this. And we're going to have to continue to put pressure. And I'll say this, I have a hard time envisioning when push comes to shove that members of Congress on the Republican side are going to do this in an environment where I think the markets will continue to react negatively. They're going to find the pressure too great to follow probably the most illegal administration in American history.
Thank you, Congressman. And this brings us to the end of tonight's town hall. Many thanks to you, Congressman, and you, Nikki, for joining us tonight and for the important work you are both doing to safeguard our democracy. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Your voices, your advocacy, and your attention to these issues is what is needed now more than ever. If you'd like to stay connected with Congressman Morelle's work, please visit morelle.house.gov, where you can sign up for the newsletter, engage with the social media, and stay up to date on current news. You can also follow Democracy Forward at democracyforward.org for updates on their legal efforts and case progress. Again, we appreciate your time, engagement, and your belief in a government that works for everyone, not just the wealthy and well-connected. Thank you. Have a great evening.